Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. You know, Cruella has its moments. It's got a great cast, a good soundtrack, and some genuinely fun scenes. Like, I would take it over the tired retread of something like the Lion King remake any day. But it has one huge problem that basically single-handedly drags it down. It has to function as a prequel to 101 Dalmatians. Now, I have nothing against that cartoon. I rewatched it this week and found it as charming as ever. But these two movies are just extremely ill-suited for each other. Taken together, they almost make the other worse just by existing. And in this video, I want to explain why. Oh, and obviously, this will contain all the spoilers. Do you remember those Dick and Jane reading books? You know, the ones where every sentence is like, "See Spot run," or "Jane said, where is Sally? I want to find Sally." Okay, well, Cruella is sort of like if a very talented group of people set out to expand the backstory of that book into a 2.5-hour movie aimed at adults. Why does Jane want to find Sally? Does she even like Sally? What led up to this momentous moment of Jane seeking her out? Now that may seem like I'm trashing the original film, but I'm really not. Cruella de Vil serves her role perfectly well in that movie. She's an evil person who wants a fur coat and is ready to kill 101 puppies to get it. There's nothing more than that. There's no deeper depths to plumb there. Cruella is a memorable, one-dimensional character in a movie for 6-year-olds, and that's completely okay. The problems come in when you bring our modern film landscape into the equation, which demands that almost every major release is tied to an already established IP. So movie studios, and especially Disney, go digging around in their back catalog for any scraps that can be repurposed. It's not hard to see why they arrived at Cruella. I'm sure they're assuming it'll play really well for the Hot Topic crowd. And to be fair, I see the appeal. Emma Stone getting to go big as a fashion supervillain, it's a fun idea. And the movie does get to have a lot of fun with it, especially in that middle section, which is easily the best part of the film. The problems arise when it needs to connect itself to 101 Dalmatians. It really tries to bring every single connection together with like a bow, which always feels super forced and ends up not even making that much sense as a prequel. It's kind of the worst of both worlds. So, alright, in the 101 Dalmatians animated film, Cruella is an old classmate of Anita's who just barges into their house because she wants to buy the Dalmatian puppies. There's not much backstory there. We know she likes to smoke, is rich because of a massive inheritance, and has two crude, stupid henchmen, Horace and Jasper, who basically have zero issues with killing and skinning a puppy. Oh, and she has a cool car. That's basically it. There's just not that much there outside of a fun and campy performance. Cruella 2021 tries to make all of that fit, except the smoking, with a screenplay that tries to take all those little crumbs and turn them into a full meal. Her just being a horrible, entitled rich lady isn't sympathetic or interesting enough. So they look to the 1996 Glenn Close live-action version to kind of fill in the rest. That take on the character saw her as a fashion mogul, and this isn't really a prequel to that because almost all the details, like Anita knowing Cruella from school, does come from the animated version, not the 1996 one. They just kinda cram them together, creating an amalgamation of both, while not really working well as a prequel to either one. Which I would be totally fine with if they also weren't just so beholden to those movies. They didn't want Cruella to be a spoiled rich person raised in the lap of luxury, which she clearly was in the first film, so they have to concoct this really goofy plotline where her fashion mogul mother literally wanted to murder her as a baby, and she was secretly given to this kindly woman to raise who put her through school with Anita, but then shortly after, the woman returns to her birth mother, the evil fashion lady, who murders her with Dalmatians. Then, years later, she winds up working for that woman without knowing she was the one who killed her mom. Oh, and along the way, she becomes best friends with a pair of street orphans who turn out to be her evil henchmen from the original film. Also, there's a lot of CG dogs that are just shoved into their elaborate heists at every opportunity because I guess it's a 101 Dalmatians prequel and people just expect dogs. If that sounds like a convoluted and tortured setup, that's because it is. It's a screenplay that's contorting itself like crazy to fit into the established story of the old movie, and the film is far worse for it. The middle section of the film is the best because it has the most breathing room away from that original story. It's just about an ambitious, poor fashion genius who's working for a cutthroat fashion mogul while also trying to usurp and upstage her. That's a perfectly good setup for a movie right there. And it gives Stone plenty of room to actually give a performance that's not just doing an impression of the cartoon or Glenn Close. She has a ton of respect for Emma Thompson's Baroness and desperately wants her approval, while also having this deep, secret well of resentment for her. She despises the Baroness, but also wants nothing more than to become her. And these are just two great actors who are really good in scenes together. That's enough. But once you graft on all of that perfunctory sequel stuff, it just gets dragged down into checking off the beats it needs to set up a 60-year-old cartoon. Horace and Jasper are great examples. In the cartoon, these are very straightforward comedy relief characters. Their only joke is that they're evil and they're stupid. But this movie tries to imbue them with some real soul. Joel Fry and Paul Walter Hauser are also really good actors. I actually think Hauser gave one of the most underrated performances of the last few years in Richard Jewell. But in this movie, they feel trapped. The movie tries to give them some depth, but at the end of the day, they're stuck being the dopey henchmen. There is zero indication in the original cartoon that Cruella grew up with these two, or that they were all hardscrabble orphans together. This version of Jasper would never be okay with skinning a dog or throwing a bottle of wine at a cat. He just seems like a super nice guy who had to do some tough things to survive. So even though the movie bends over backwards to place them in their 101 Dalmatians role, it also gives us a version of the character who has almost nothing in common with that role. And if that's the case, just stop trying to do the prequel thing. Just let these characters breathe and not have to tie in so literally to the animated film. 101 Dalmatians, for a film that I don't think is really anyone's favorite Disney classic, has already been monetized to death. You've got the straight-to-video sequel, the 2 live-action films, the 1997 animated series, the 2019 CG animated series. It's a lot. Really, the only thing a Disney has never touched is the sequel to the original book by the author Dottie Smith. Which is kind of weird, right? It's called The Starlight Barking, and according to Wikipedia, the plot sees a god come down to Earth and tell the Dalmatians that he's lonely and is offering them a chance to avoid the pain of nuclear war in the future. Wait, what? Okay, I guess them not adapting that does make a little more sense now, but you know what? At least it would feel new. The problem with Cruella is that every idea of its own gets pushed aside in service of the old film. The reveal that Dalmatians killed her mom, even if it turns out to be a little bit more complicated than that, feels like something from an SNL parody skit about a dark, gritty Cruella movie. And the ending doesn't make it better.
Crime has been committed.
Yeah, puppy, puppy.
And you can help solve it. You're part of the story.
The ending, which sees the character fake her own death while leaving her inheritance to her alter ego Cruella, is such a mess and so clumsily handled that it really washes away most of the goodwill that the second act had built up. I hate to sound too harsh on this movie, but when it's bad, it's very bad. It doesn't help that the CG during her secret cliff parachuting scene looks shockingly bad too. Like Suicide Squad, the movie is basically wall-to-wall needle drops, and has a pretty solid soundtrack, which kept things moving along nicely, even if it does kind of feel like it's there just to paper over how sloppy the screenplay is. Maybe because of that, all the contrived twists do go down a little smoother than you'd probably think on paper. But without all of that stuff, this could have just been a good movie. In the end, the thing that killed Cruella, that made it a far lesser movie than it could have been, was its connection to 101 Dalmatians. But that's also the only reason that it exists. I get that it's really cliche to complain about everything being a sequel, prequel, or reboot, but watching Cruella, wow, you really feel it. I've been making probably too many negative videos in a row these past few weeks. I didn't really mean to, it just kind of worked out that way. But if you're in the mood for some positivity, I definitely want to shout out my video on Rick and Morty's title sequence, along with one on Cheers, on my streaming video service, Nebula. There's a ton of stuff in that series. Extra Credits has covered Cowboy Bebop, Wonder Why did Friends, Now You See It has covered The Simpsons, and way more. Nebula is doing an amazing job of giving creators an alternative to that pretty brutal YouTube algorithm. Plus, Nebula and CuriosityStream come bundled together in a great deal. They just released Rise, the story of Augustine's, a really emotional look at the music industry and how singer William McCarthy dealt with a huge loss. It's a great title, and you combine that with their documentaries on science, nature, and tech, and you have a really good offer. You can get all of this for $14.79. Like I always say, that's not for a month, that's for an entire year, a 26% discount. So get the deal now by going to curiositystream.com/captainmidnight. That's curiositystream.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.